What are the latest developments in the trade frictions between China and the United States? You might think that trade frictions are just a simple clash between the two countries at the trade level. However, in reality, there are more complex factors hidden behind them. Both China and the United States are currently facing certain financial pressures, and the key lies in what strategies the two countries will adopt to deal with these challenges. In recent years, the United States has faced many difficulties in raising funds. This is because the United States is indeed facing a shortage of funds. For example, former President Trump once declared that he would impose tariffs on the whole world. The reason behind this was that the United States was short of money, so he tried to increase fiscal revenue in this way. President Trump also had an unfulfilled campaign promise, which was to cut taxes. In order to achieve the goal of tax cuts, he tried every means to increase revenue and reduce expenditure. In terms of reducing expenditure, he promoted some measures aimed at improving government efficiency. In terms of increasing revenue, he chose to impose tariffs on the world, hoping that in this way, funds could flow back to the United States, so as to realize the goal of tax cuts for the American people. This was a grand plan of his, but it has not been implemented smoothly so far. Let's take a look. There is a subtle connection between the logic of tax cuts and various behaviors of the United States in the trade frictions. Previously, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development (OECD) organized 140 countries to sign an agreement, and President Biden also signed it at that time. The core of this agreement is to impose a minimum tax on global multinational enterprises. At that time, U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said that some large multinational enterprises are so large that they can even evade government taxes. These large enterprises take advantage of setting up institutions in multiple countries and transfer their companies to low-tax regions to avoid taxes. Therefore, at that time, there was a hope to unite the global forces to ensure that no matter where these enterprises hide, they should pay taxes according to a minimum tax rate of 15%. However, after Trump came to power, he withdrew from this agreement. He believed that the agreement was unfair, claiming that most of the enterprises accused of tax evasion were American enterprises, and the agreement did not conduct an in-depth discussion on the reasons for the tax evasion of American enterprises. Instead, it targeted and restricted American enterprises. Trump believed that this was a discriminatory and disproportionate treatment of American enterprises, so he chose to withdraw. The enterprises pointed out include large multinational technology companies such as Microsoft, Apple, and Google. Mate in the original text may be a miswriting of Google, especially those operating in the field of internet platforms. It is indeed difficult to tax them. For example, Amazon conducts business globally and has earned a large amount of profits through e-commerce in countries such as France and Italy. However, its company headquarters may be located in the United States, and the taxes are mainly collected by the US government. This makes European countries such as France, Italy, and Germany feel unfair, believing that these enterprises make money in their own countries but do not pay enough taxes to their own countries. Therefore, Europe has formulated the digital market law aimed at taxing these enterprises. Now, Trump seemingly protects American enterprises by preventing other countries from taxing them, but in fact, he wants to keep these taxes within the United States. The U.S. Republican Party has recently proposed to tax the wealthy. Surprisingly, Trump, who is also a wealthy person, actually expressed his support. They have put forward two plans. One is to tax the ultra-wealthy with an annual income of more than $5 million. There are about 75,000 such people in the United States. If taxed at a rate of 40%, it is expected to bring about $150 billion in tax revenue over 10 years. The other plan is to tax people with an annual income of more than $1 million, and the number of affected people is about 650,000. It is expected to obtain $400 billion in tax revenue over 10 years. However, it has not been determined which plan to choose yet. But judging from the current situation, the U.S. Republican Party seems to have reached a large consensus on the issue of taxing the rich. However, in terms of increasing revenue and reducing expenditure, some practices of the United States seem to have problems. While Trump promotes the improvement of government efficiency, he has carried out large-scale layoffs of the Internal Revenue Service (IRS) in the United States. But the problem is, who will collect taxes after the layoffs? Some experts have analyzed that the large-scale layoffs of the IRS may lead to the federal government losing up to $1 trillion in tax revenue in the next 10 years. On one hand, the government is trying hard to tax the rich to increase fiscal revenue, and on the other hand, it may lose a huge amount of tax revenue due to the layoffs of the IRS. The Trump administration needs to carefully weigh the pros and cons of this. In addition, Trump's measures have also angered the European Union, because he declared that other countries should not tax American enterprises, but the United States should tax these enterprises itself, which has caused dissatisfaction in the European Union. Not long ago, on April 23rd, the European Union made a ruling against companies such as Apple and Google according to the digital market law, requiring them to pay high fines. The European Union believes that it is unfair that these enterprises make money in Europe, but pay taxes back to their home countries. Apple has a regulation that requires app developers who list their applications on the App Store to refrain from directing users to the developer's own official websites for payment transactions. This means that if users want to make a payment, they can only do so within Apple's ecosystem, and Apple charges a commission for each transaction. If developers direct users back to their official websites for payment, Apple will lose out on this revenue. Therefore, Apple has implemented restrictions similar to a firewall. The European Union considers this practice to be unfair competition. According to relevant regulations, the EU imposed a fine of €500 million on Apple and also fined Meta €200 million, although the reasons for fining Meta are different. It can be seen that the EU is taking punitive actions against US tech giants in accordance with the digital market law. Currently, these fines may seem negligible to these tech giants, but it remains to be seen whether the EU will continue to impose taxes or fines on them using other pretexts in the future. These series of events have undoubtedly further strained the already tense US-EU relations due to tariff issues. Regarding the economic and trade relations between China and the United States, Trump has recently signaled some relaxation. He stated that the US tariffs on China are too high, reaching 14.5%. The original statement of 145 percentage points is incorrect, and he is willing to reduce them, although not to zero. The extent of the reduction will depend on the negotiations between China and the United States. However, the US still holds some bargaining chips in an attempt to force China into negotiations. On one hand, the US may delist some Chinese companies listed in the US. Although this move may cause many negative impacts, it is still regarded as one of the US last resorts. On the other hand, some experts have analyzed that Trump may impose taxes on Chinese assets in the US. Due to the large-scale investments China made in the US during the period of good Sino-US relations, many fixed assets and real estates are currently in the US. It is difficult to predict the impact if the US government takes actions against these assets, and these will be key areas to watch in the future. On the surface, the economic and trade frictions between China and the United States seem to be about technological competition or a major power's containment of a rising power. However, upon in-depth analysis, one of the key factors behind this is the financial pressure faced by both countries. The US government has long been in financial distress, and it has faced multiple government shutdown crises. This time, the US may be facing an even more severe financial crisis, with the risk of national debt default. Once this happens, it will trigger a serious government credit crisis. To ease financial pressure, the US has resorted to measures such as imposing tariffs. At the same time, the claim that China is facing a serious debt crisis does not conform to the facts. The Chinese government attaches great importance to debt issues. Through a series of effective measures, it reasonably controls the debt scale and optimizes the debt structure. China actively promotes economic restructuring and transformation and upgrading. It promotes stable economic growth by expanding domestic demand and strengthening infrastructure construction. Local governments have also taken standardized measures in debt management and effectively resolved debt risks through means such as debt swaps. China's economic development is stable, with strong risk resistance and resilience, playing an increasingly important role in the global economic landscape. The different economic and political systems of China and the United States determine that the two sides adopt different strategies in dealing with financial pressure. This economic and trade game has gone beyond the scope of simple tariff and technological competition. It is more like a contest of comprehensive national strength. Its outcome will have a profound impact on the future world political and economic landscape. The international community is closely watching how China and the United States respond to their respective economic challenges. Whoever can demonstrate stronger resilience and response capabilities in this game will largely influence the confidence of global investors and the flow of funds.